Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is September 25, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's a pleasure and an honor and a privilege to be here with four of my favorite people in the world to discuss Jean-Luc Godard, What's Next? We welcome Mike Sakamoto, Rob Dew, Patrick McGee, and John Canizero. Thank you so much, gentlemen. The first question is do you approve of assisted suicide or do you disapprove of it? We'll start with you, Patrick.
Well, I approve of it. I actually, I was talking to my retirement manager some years ago, and she asked us, why do you want to go to Seattle? I said, well, because they have assisted suicide there. She said that was the best answer she had ever gotten to that question.
Wow.
Although I didn't literally mean it, but I did sort of literally mean it.
Hey, sort of literally meaning it. That's for sure. Maybe. That's beautiful, Patrick. But you literally do live in Seattle, right?
Yeah.
And you spent most of your life where?
Well, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and then I went to California to grad school. And then I thought I'd gotten out of the South, but when I went on the job market, I ended up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so 30 years later, I finally got out of the South. If anyone's in the South, I apologize, but I wanted to get out of the South since I was about 18 years old, and it seemed like I was never going to achieve it. So that's
all right. Thank you, Patrick. Robbie, you're up. Agree or disagree with assisted suicide?
Oh, I agree. It's especially important if you live in Seattle.
Wait, Rob, you live where now?
I live in Ashland, Oregon, which significantly better. Still rainy. Still quite rainy compared to Southern California.
Okay, John.
I agree with it, although I really haven't given it much thought until just recently. It's funny because I saw Peter Greenaway was in town with a bunch of his films, and they did a big retrospective, and he brought up assisted suicide as something that he's wondering why Americans are so they frown upon it so much, where he sees there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever, and it should be a right for everybody.
They're afraid of death.
What'd you say, Rob?
Death. Americans are very afraid of death.
Americans are afraid of death, which is
chalk
funny
that up to
because
materialism.
Yeah, well, especially in like Los Angeles, where they hide the cemeteries. Even no one can even see that stuff.
And the wrinkles.
Jesus, that is beautiful. Yeah, and Greenaway loves to bitch about Herzog, and I love Greenaway. He's a Wakey, and he loves James Joyce. And he's bitching about U.S. frowning on it. Okay, Mike, you're up.
Like John, I haven't really thought about it too deeply, but yeah, I would say I'm for it. I'm against suffering and pain, and why not?
Yeah, I'd have to go along. Oh, good. I'd have to go along with Greenaway. I'm not really for it. I mean, Godard was too important of a human to check out. And as you can see in this Instagram interview that I sent a link to from 2 years ago, he's 91 and he's alive and talking and thinking. Now, he suffered and he wanted to check out. That's fine. He has that right. But I thought that was a funny way to start. Okay, now we go into many of these. Oh, look at this picture I wanted to show people of Godard. Look at that. Isn't that funny? He's smiling. That's People Magazine gave him like one line. Godard died, and they put a picture of him smiling. So, all these people weighed in and said how important Godard was to them. And someone said he changed how we see movies. Okay, I'll start with you, Mike. How do we see movies?
How do we see movies? Well, I mean, we've certainly been trained to see movies in a certain way, like a certain type of Hollywood film. I mean, he definitely provided us with new ways to think about movies, new forms, new techniques. But I can't give you really a satisfactory answer.
That's fine.
We'll move on to
Train
the
is,
next person.
say it again.
Oh, move on to the next person.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Train is a key word there. Okay, John, how do we see movies?
It's a really difficult thing because I think the way we see them, at least for me, has changed since I started watching movies as a kid till now. And I think that was what Godard did, was he made you think about how we see movies while we're watching his movies.
Yeah. It's good.
So,
Okay. Robbie, how do we see movies?
We see them in the context of our own fantasies and dreams for our lives. I, like John, my relationship to movies have changed dramatically as I've gotten older, and things that used to work no longer work. And, now that they're so available and you can just see them, you can see 4 in a night from your couch. It's someone would say it's cheapened the process, and they're less special, and that's you can debate that, but we see them in our mind's eye and we live them. And I think Godard threw a spanner in the works, and he caused you in the middle of your fantasy to look down at your hand and go, wait a minute, this is a dream. This isn't really happening. And he was a bit disorienting, particularly to American viewers, and who are used to films in which things work out for the protagonist in a logical fashion.
Thanks, Rob. Go ahead, Patrick.
Well, I don't know. See, I've always personally questioned Godard's influence as being really that great, because I think what he really did was, and I kind of agree with Robbie, is that we do approach movies with our dreams, fantasies, and so forth and so on. And I think Godard definitely forced us to see the process, film as a process, and even a manipulation, and he didn't, in my view, he wasn't necessarily saying that all mass produced films or whatever, popular films are manipulative, but rather he manipulated you in such a way that you knew you were being manipulated. And that was interesting. But I also found it to be a formula that got old pretty quickly, for me at any rate. And once in a while he'd do something that really knocked me over, like Weekend. Just to give you an example, I mean, like that scene where they're obviously really gutting a real pig. And and that was a long time ago. It was before Hollywood, and a lot of film industries cleaned up their act in terms of animals. But clearly it was meant to shock the spectator, because you knew that it was real. You could see that it was real. I mean, even now when we see things, we know they're fake, But see, I also would credit spectators as being more savvy than people think. I don't think everyone's sort of entirely taken in. I mean, I realize that there's a kind of idiot response sometimes, like I used to read student papers where students were writing about that. I forget the name of the movie. There was 2 versions of it. The early version of the movie where the high school kids are going to take on the Soviet Union that's invading the United States.
Red Dawn.
Yeah, Red Dawn. And like, where they were really buying it, like, that's a great idea. We can do it, and it's like, come on, wake up. But in general, I think spectators pick and choose their fantasies more than we realize. And that there's a logic there. And I mean, I don't know that Godard would see things that way or not, but I just found some of the movies got tedious after a while, to me, Yeah. And I think Breathless is one of the most overrated movies in the history of film. I mean, it's an interesting movie. It's but how many times can you watch it without going to sleep? I mean, it's once you get into what he's doing, sort of anatomizing the process, it's just not that captivating for me. So I don't know. I'm just sort of.
It's good. Patrick, you really nailed it. You got to anticipate our next question. We got two setups before we go to John and then Rob. Really quick. Yeah, most of us didn't watch on Sean Underloo and know that razor was cutting a dead donkey's eye.
Mhm.
How long did it take for us to learn that? And many people don't even know it and don't realize it. But it's still an alarming scene, even though now I know that. So I like what you said, Patrick, there. And then also, just to go along with Quentin Tortellini, who said, I just ripped off Godard at the beginning. Then I abandoned his ass. I'm out of here now. I don't need his shit anymore. And so that, at least he admitted that. Okay, so John and then Robbie. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment on the way, like, as a child watching movies, I remember distinctly a time when I was mad because I was crying. When I was a little kid, I was crying about some movie, and I was mad that it was making me upset and cry and being manipulated. And that's when I think I became an experimental filmmaker, because I decided I don't like that kind of movie making. But it was how I changed seeing movies at that point.
Yeah.
So I started to and I think Godard was important in breaking that fourth wall, that we used to only see movies as this was the reality here. And now, a film like Weekend, which is my favorite Godard film, he breaks it all the time. Characters turn to the camera and say, what a crappy movie. I never get a good line. And, it's like making you aware at the same time you're watching one and how you're watching one. So anyways, it was just a
but
thought.
we should before you go, Robbie, we should psychoanalyze you, John, right now. Do you cry in life now and not hold yourself against it? Like you go, I shouldn't be crying. Huh?
Yeah, I do now. I mean, as a young man, I didn't, or tried not to, but I still did. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I mean now, if you're crying, not in a movie, in real life.
Yeah.
Go, I shouldn't be crying. I should.
No. Now I don't care anymore.
Now you let it go. Okay. Okay, yeah. Rob, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just going to respond to what Patrick said. It was interesting. I mean, I've shown Godard films, most particularly Breathless, to students, and they mostly find it extremely tedious after a while, especially reading subtitles, of course. And I've gone back and forth. There's times when you think of it as tedious, and his ideas, as John said, it plays itself out. After a half hour into the film, it's like, well, let's just give me the story and let's go on the adventure, rather than constantly commenting that we're about to go on an adventure. But then, I've gone back and forth, and also maybe it's a bit gauche. It's not appropriate to bag on Godard. You don't sound appropriately intellectual and like a coastal elite, Patrick. I mean, we're going to send you back to the South if you keep making these statements. But yeah, I mean, that's a debate.
Yeah,
I was trying to think of what. Well, go ahead.
No, in the Groove Tube or one of those spoof movies, they go, send him to Detroit.
I was trying to think of what painter to equate Godard to, and I was thinking maybe Braque. Picasso maybe transcended that early work, but the Cubists were trying to show us, well, here's the nose from this angle, here's the nose from this angle in the same painting, sort of essentially illustrating their process and as an attempt to show it more clearly. And of course, Braque is largely forgotten in the sunlight of Picasso. But let's pass the ball to Mike, because I don't have anything more interesting to say.
No, my friend, the critic Bill Crone, he said that when Breathless came out in the U.S., he read a review that described it as a Cubist film. That really intrigued him. But I have to say, Breathless, Contempt, and A Married Woman are probably my I don't dislike them, or I'm not bored by them. Those are his more classical films, and they hold my attention whereas the other ones are challenging, like Made in the USA or La Chinoise. But those three, I think, really hold up as captivating.
Yeah, then that's like the dude made like 130 films. We know he's like, well, there's this section where he just kicked ass, and then the rest is like, none of us are referring to his socialism or blah, blah, blah. Okay, John, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and also I think we got to keep in mind about a film like Breathless, which is not my favorite Godard film by any means, but the time it came out has a big portion too, like it was, nowadays kids in class, like Rob was saying, you get bored with it, but they've seen all that stuff on MTV, but because Godard had done it in 60. So I think some of it was the audacity of the time too, that, you can't make a film like this. So I think that's its power more than it as a film or as a story, I think.
Yep. Go ahead, Rob.
And very often, like in a film history class, you have to show the films that like Easy Rider. Very important in the history of film. Very important to the economics of film. Very overly long. Also, you can get bored with that. It's got great moments and seminal moments, but much like a Godard, you're looking at the sketch. You're looking at a rough draft, and I think Godard even said that's what he wanted to show us, was the rough draft rather than the finished, polished piece, which American cinema is so precious about, and wanting to create a fully perfect, content editing and so on and so forth. Incidentally, too, changing subject slightly, I've noticed that the jump cut has become very embraced by YouTubers.
Yeah.
And I think what they're doing, I was watching this guy talk, and what they'll do a jump cut. So they're in the middle of talking, and then they suddenly flash, and they're with no concern that there'd be a jump cut in there. And I think it's almost as if they record themselves, they make mistakes. Then they take that one little piece of media and cut out the little parts where there are mistakes and go ahead and butt the scenes together, thereby creating jump cuts, which is quite brilliant. It's much more efficient. Mm-hmm. And they still, that jump cut is really being fully embraced by the younger generation as a way to sort of clip the time, keep it moving, and also essentially create a flash on the screen, which triggers the eye. And I watched this one last night, and he had his cuts were like almost on a rhythm. It was no more than like 4 seconds before he would have a boop in his. He's still talking to you, still the same image, but it's jump cut to later. And just wanted to throw that in because it jumped into my mind last night.
It's brilliant, Rob. All of you guys have VSP because you're anticipating what we're going to talk about, and we're going to get into jump cut. Go ahead, Patrick, and then we're going to go back.
Well, I was going to say something about jump cuts.
Why don't you wait until we get into jump, if you can? Because I didn't want to get too far as he changed how we see movies. So the first question is, how do we see movies? Well, my answer would be we see movies with our eyes and we cough up some bucks unless we can cheat and check them out from the library or, get them free on TV. How do we see movies? You go to the back of a movie theater and walk in the exit backwards. And then how do you see it? With your eyes and your ears, sitting in a movie theater. But like Rob said, you can see it. So Salvador Dali said, you got to watch movies with your eyes shut. And both Patrick and Rob anticipated the next question is, first movie that had an impact on me in Flint, Michigan was Bambi, and I fell asleep during it. So then years later, I find my guru, Harry Smith, said the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. And look at when I went to college at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, there wasn't even film studies yet. But we had film classes. It was sort of like film theory-ish. And I would go to films that I was required to see and fall asleep. And then the films that I wasn't required to see, I would stay up. Now, how can you explain that phenomenon? So Harry Smith saying cinema, the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. Mike, you're going to answer the question, but first tell us the quote. The question is, you could start thinking about it, is what is the function of cinema? Okay, so Mike, in a Godard quote, he said cinema is the history of this filmmaker to this filmmaker. What was the two filmmakers?
D.W. Griffith to Abbas Kiarostami.
Kiarostami said, I prefer the films that put their audiences to sleep in the theater. So here's Godard, the guy we're talking about, saying Kiarostami's the cool guy, and this guy's saying he prefers films that put their audience to sleep in the theater. To say, have a nice nap and leave you not disturbed. Which is like, well, I think Godard was saying what Buñuel says. If my films don't fuck your shit up, I failed. Okay, but John, insert something. But Mike, you're up first. What's the function of cinema? Go ahead, John. What were you going to
No, I was just going to say that Jean Cocteau said cinema allows us all to dream the same dream together, back to sleep. So
yeah, I mean, they're collective dream houses. People go in there to have a dream together. Of course, everyone's slightly different. Some people might fall asleep, but they're collective dream houses where we go in to have a collective vision.
But that's an effect. Now we're going to go Mike, John, Robbie, and Patrick. What is the function of cinema? So is it to go ahead, Mike?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I want you to go first, and we'll go back
Well,
around.
Responding to the last two comments, to be honest, I don't really go to the theater anymore. I just watch Blu-rays.
But I'm saying, even in your sense that you watch a film, you literally sit down. I'm going to watch a film on my cell phone or on my computer screen or in a theater. What is the function of cinema for you? I mean, you're a filmmaker, John. We're all film teachers, film scholars, makers. What is the function of cinema for you, just personally?
Well, for me, I guess it's maybe a form of entertainment, really. Good. Intellectual entertainment, just for pleasure. I can't really think of a deeper purpose that film serves for me than to occupy myself in a meaningful way.
Yeah, but Mike, that's what we want. We want to hear your hunch, your guess. We don't have to overthink these questions. First thought, best. So that's great because you again anticipated a big issue we're going to talk about: entertainment. Okay, John, what's the function of cinema?
Function of cinema for me is the way I structure and live my life. It's, I mean, not to sound high and mighty, but I mean, I make films to work through ideas or thoughts or problems or whatever, just within, it's just, I always think and act and work within film.
Yeah.
So its function for me is just how I proceed my life, how it moves forward.
Yeah. Well, that Godard said that several times. That's really good, John. Okay, Robbie, what's the function of cinema?
They're training educational films for your own personal hero's journey. You get to see other people trying different things. And, before I lived in New York, I lived in the South, and, I was very curious and very scared of New York City. And I would see films like Scorsese's, was it Up All Night or After Dark? And, it's like this hero's journey. You get to see a character go through trials that you have gone through or that you anticipate going through, relationships, and you get to see their foibles, their choices. You're rooting for them. You especially like it if the choices mirror your own. And then at the end, you get a resolution as to how that might go. And, so training ground for your own personal hero's journey.
Love it.
One function, entertainment, of course, too.
Yeah.
But
but that was good. Okay, Patrick.
I thought that sounded more intellectual, so I went with it.
Let's go. Whatever. That's fine. Patrick, you're up.
Okay. At the risk of over intellectualizing, for me, cinema is a form of hope. Because the way I look at it is that, I see what I see in film, and what I see, like when a film is attracting a lot of audience, and I see this film as something that has a kind of subversive subtext, to it. But if you go up and talk to the people in the audience, like say about Titanic or whatever, well, yeah, I just love the romance, or this or that. But the film is about the apocalypse of a class system. I mean, symbolically, that's what it is. And when I see that, it gives me hope because, I don't believe in God, but I believe in people. And, but to me, believing in people is much more challenging than believing in God because they disappoint you continually. But when I see these possibilities within cinema, especially cinema that actually is popular, because that's the one that's connecting to the most heads, it gives me hope and it gives me a sense of vision. And to me, that's what, not just cinema, that's what art is about, and I like what John said, because art is, my view is that everything is thought, not just abstract propositions, and artists who make films are thinking through visual expressions, but none of us ever fully get the total implications of what we're thinking. I mean, other people have to participate in that process, and that's to me, the visual image is so powerful precisely because it can't be reduced to one-on-one references. Of course, nothing can really, but with the visual image, it's literally impossible because there's always, something outside the frame that exerts pressure on what's within the frame, including you, the spectator, who bring to it all this stuff going on in your own head, that participates in the construction of meaning or understanding. And that's why it gives me hope, because I see possibilities along those lines.
Really well put. All of your answers really anticipate a lot we're going to talk about, and I appreciate it. Godard saw Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 411 or whatever it's called at the Cannes Film Festival, and he went up to Michael Moore and he says, "Dude, this film's going to help Bush get elected." Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. So it wasn't Michael's intent, but it is, a funny little twist that there is intention in filmmaking that's involved. Like Cindy Lumet, who is a socially aware filmmaker, said, films can't do diddly squat, but it ain't going to keep me from trying. So, he tried to bring up issues in his films and give people hope. And so both McLuhan and Andy Warhol said that art is anything you can get away with. So, let's go back to Mike saying entertainment, and it is indeed a form of entertainment. I mean, it is a way, you go back to the guy who did the Eskimo film, he was not so much creating art as this is something I can make money on. And it's not a bad thing. Nanook's could be studied as an important film, but the fact that he made it because he thought the return on his investment would be good, hey, all the power to him. So McLuhan has this line about, is there a difference between entertainment and education? And he basically says that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So we can teach people or have an agenda or have an attention when we're making films. Godard probably had intentions, and listening to him talk in all these interviews and all the books where he talks about the process, him being a critic, it goes on and on. We'll start with you, Patrick. Tell me your feelings on this distinction between entertainment and education. Whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Any thoughts on that idea?
Well, I think there's some truth in that, but I I start from this premise, and this is what I used to teach my students, that we use the word entertainment like that explains something. And we don't even know what it is. I mean, what does it mean to be entertained? Does it mean simply that you're feeling good or that you're experiencing pleasure? Or does it mean that you are captured by the cinematic experience? We tend to regard it as a kind of negative, like if something is merely entertaining, then it's, really not that valuable. But I mean, the first time you see a lot of Godard films, particularly in the early period, they were captivating. So in that sense, they were entertaining because they were new, they were fresh. Later on, it became more difficult to sustain that. So I don't know what entertainment is. What I think it is the process by which films, capture us and engage us, and we don't really know entirely what's going on there. And that's what makes it such a fascinating art form. But again, that's like all art.
Yeah.
You're interested in Finnegan's Wake, and who knows what's going on in the process of reading that. I mean, it's, if you can even call it reading, because you can't read Finnegan's Wake, for example, the way you'd read a regular book, And so, I mean, I see, like, one of the things that Godard did that I really admire, he didn't do it alone, because I think Truffaut and Romer did as well, but he forced us to look back at movies that were categorized as B movies, sort of schlock commodities, Saturday afternoon fillers, and see that was where some of the real art was in cinema, and that was an incredible thing, because I think he was right. I mean, we go back now and we really admire some of that stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in on that point. A few of our great filmmakers have done that. I mean, Spielberg and Lucas did that in the 70s by bringing you, 30 serials. Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars are sort of modeled on Flash Gordon and, radio plays and so forth. Tarantino has done it with his films, where he kind of went back and tapped into Grindhouse for source material. And we've had a few filmmakers that have kind of gone back and, I mean, maybe we shouldn't even celebrate this, but they're essentially taking the low art and bringing it into the high theater, into the high form. And that's been very effective. Maybe that's just a merchandising technique, but it also, is reminding us that there's great art in the depths, even in stuff that is purely entertaining, or this considered guttural, that's considered lower. There's art in it, and as you said, Jerry, it's entertaining. There's people are going to see these films that we, look down on. They love them, So there was a genius, I guess, in bringing that into the high theater. But how does that make them less valuable if people love them?
Yeah, I'll respond really quick to that, Rob. Great divert, because I went to this highbrow ritzy film festival that's not highbrow. It's called the Mendocino Film Festival. And this woman gave a really cool lecture on how, Avatar or Titanic is going to accomplish sort of what Patrick says, a hope, or communicate an agenda better than, say, a Michael Moore film. Because she said, like, Avatar was the most seen film in the history of the world when it came out. It was anti the man, pro Mother Nature. And what did people say when they left the film? Good special effects. but indeed, maybe it raised some consciousness. We don't know, because I like what Patrick said earlier about this thing where we got to give people more credit than we don't. Americans are stupid. I don't like when people say that. I think everybody has a valid awareness, and some people can maybe intellectualize it better. But that was good, Patrick, what you said. And thank God John's back, because we need you back, John. That's good.
All right.
You missed
light
all the
here,
good
John.
lines.
It's light.
You guys
this
talk
is
about me while I was gone?
yeah, well, this is amazing because you miss all these key lines, and then when you're asked this new question, you might
I'm freezing up
reiterate
again.
something that's already said. I'll say it in a second, but it is we don't know. I liked what Patrick said is he answered a question with a question almost. We don't know what entertainment is or what it does. We want to say, here's a word. We found this word to tell us what this thing does to us. And then we're happy with the word. And then we all, like Lily Tomlin says it best, reality is a collective hunch. Words are a collective hunch. We want to believe that we're all communicating. So now the question is between entertainment and education, McLuhan said, whatever pleases teaches us more effectively. So I think who answered it? Patrick did.
I haven't really. I guess I went off on Patrick. But let's go to Mike.
Okay.
He hasn't spoken a bit.
Okay, no, I was going to say, Mike, you go, then Rob, then John. Go ahead.
I thought Patrick's use of the word engagement is a better way to describe what I was trying to get at when I said entertainment.
Yeah.
I wasn't so much speaking of commodity entertainment as film being a way to engage myself.
Yeah.
And I find it to be, I find, watching a Bresson film as a form of entertainment. But again, a way to engage with what Bresson is trying to say, for example, and not so much just trying to find pleasure, just a more kind of superficial pleasure, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and the word pleases is interesting. And McLuhan's saying, is there he says there's no distinction between entertainment and education. And then he says basically whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So that also is like these guys, Truffaut and Godard, knew they were creating a product, commodity culture, but they were like, hey, we got a new commodity culture. And, we're going to get sold to smart ass college kids in America eventually. And they're going to take it on as, this is the way of new cinema so that I can get my films in popcorn theaters too. So it's not to fight and say, no, we're anti-capitalist, we're anti-commodity culture because we've all been engaged in it our whole lives. And we're not just living in a cave and, looking at the light reflections on the wall. But, then these guys go to the Cannes Film Festival in the midst of the 60s and go, the Cannes Film Festival sucks. It's like, give me a break. Godard and Truffaut are trying to close down Cannes Film. Yeah, like in 10 years, give me my retrospect and, show all my shitty old film, my shitty new films. But, in the 60s, we felt we could shut it down. So anyways, Rob, you're up, and then John. This idea that the entertainment and education are not different. Whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Any thoughts?
Totally disagree, or excuse me, totally agree. And I think that's absolutely true. And you'll come away from the theater with much more if the film reaches you, teaches you, pleases you. I mean, I was thinking, I've been doing this whole bit on Freud and Bernays, and in a certain way, we think of entertainment as almost like the id. Like if it's entertaining, it's pleasing your id, and education is pleasing your superego, like what you should learn, like all the righteous and good things that must be done and learned in this world. And in truth, they really should blend, but we do often, separate them. I don't know if that's inherited Christian morality of sort of do the right thing, or the difficult, unpleasant task is better. Vegetables are better for you than cheese and French fries. But it's better, maybe a a couple French fries on the plate and some vegetables. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Godard's films also educated me, however wrongly, about French culture. And as I think I said in another Zoom, Godard is about, and the attitude of Breathless and the films in general is about 20% of what I think of when I think of the French, which is a little bit of a contrarian perspective, very cool, very hip, unwilling to go along with the crowd and the sort of meet your expectations for conversations for a film or for a thought process. So in that respect, it began my understanding and my love of French culture and their sort of unique perspective on the world stage.
And that really well put, Rob. I have a file this thick of all the clippings from the last 2 weeks of Godard in all the newspapers. My favorite one is he made the fashion section of the New York Times. Jean-Luc Godard and how he affects fashion. And it's like that woman with her short hair. That was like, give me, that's why the CIA brainwashed her, blah, blah, blah.
I mean, could you maybe say that, he used his public appearances and his, relative fame almost like a performance artist? I mean, I think he went into a lot of interviews as a contrarian, and he was almost like, I made these, I made these kooky little films, and now this has elevated me to this status. I'm going to play in this playground and maybe not take it as seriously as other people, which, of course, tracks with his films.
And knows what he's doing, because he did have beautiful women and he did beautiful cinematography. Just watch Fiona Apple, our Venice's own. She did a 5-minute film of her singing Imagination to all these great, beautiful Godard clips. And it's really beautiful when you shove a bunch of Godard clips in 5 minutes. You can't, it is bearable. Okay, John, you're up.
Well, I sort of missed because of the computer problem.
Okay, McLuhan said there's no difference between entertainment and education. It basically is whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So just jump off on it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess. I mean, that sounds legit. I mean,
that's McLuhan told me. He sounds legit.
But I don't know if I'm still thinking in terms of cinema, then I don't think of education or entertainment as being part of it for me. I think of cinema like somebody quoted Campbell earlier, Hero with a Thousand Faces, whatever. Campbell talks about the definition of art that he got from Joyce, which is that it shouldn't pull you towards it or push you away from it. It shouldn't educate. It shouldn't be, what did he use it? Joyce's terms, didactic pornography. It shouldn't, it should just, you should be you and an artwork, and you should say, we are one. This is, this touches me without pulling or pushing and so for me, I think of it that way, I guess, is the only thing. So, but I'm sure, I'm sure if you had if you were trying to teach something, then of course, you catch more flies, right? What is that whole thing? So it makes sense that.
Well, it's like my thing about art and studying it for 50 years is great art should fuck your shit up and go, I can do that. So, Godard's perfect. Like, what the fuck is this? And then, I can go do that. That's easy, So I don't know. That's like, Rob, you brought up morals. I thought that was cool because here's a Godard quote. You can't, in sound morals, condemn a man for taking care of his own integrity. It is his clear duty. So Godard liked to quote Joseph Conrad. And he made up the quote, basically. He says, we work at night and we do what we can. Doubt is our passion, and passion is our duty. Sounds all romantic. And he says, the rest is the madness of art. So it's like Godard was really good at bullshitting like McLuhan, but a lot of it was, he's trying to suss out because he's saying that doubt is our passion. It isn't just, emotion and passion, that it is also doubt. And Auden the poet said the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. Go ahead, John. What were you going
to? No, I was just going to say that I think in relation to this, for Godard, he just had a good way. He was always able to look at everything from just askew. It's like, so I think some of it he's playing with, of course. I mean, all big filmmakers, create this persona and play that game. Herzog, Greenaway, all those. But with Godard, it was things like, when they said, don't you think a movie should have a beginning, a middle, and an end? And he said, sure, but just not necessarily in that order. He could always spin things slightly. And I think that was his strength, was that ability to, to turn and look at it a different way.
Go ahead, Rob.
And the way I would teach it in the class is say, okay, we've looked at film history and we come up with the 50s, and Americans had, by the 50s really hammered out this continuity-based 3-act story structure, linear, we all know the tropes, and this was film, and that's really what most Americans are used to. You meet a character and then there's a happy ending at the end, they go on a journey, all that, and it goes back, of course, hero's journey, all the way back to the Greeks, I suppose. But Godard was unwilling to accept that languaging and say, well, wait a minute, cinema can be something else. And so it's to me, I would often make the analogy that it was punk rock. It was, it was, and that the jump cut was, the equivalent. The record scratch used to be a really bad thing. Hip hop turns the record scratch into a feature of the art form.
Yeah.
And the jump cut was the record scratch. It was, wait a minute, you've created this language of art, which we film, which we all have generally accept and now have become conformed to, right? That's why his films are so jarring the first time you see them. He's going to come in and sort of jar your conventions, the new static form that you've slipped into for what you think a film should be. So I always love that he was willing to be that contrarian. And
he had the courage to do that.
He was seeing film with a beginner's mind, as opposed to thousands of films that we all have seen, most of which had a 3-act story structure and a fucking happy ending.
And that's what happens. You become a film writer, a critic, and then you go, I can do this. And Ebert was a perfect example, film critic, and then Russ Meyer says, dude, write my film.
But you also become conformed to the collective dream, which is, that's what becomes entertaining, to use the terms we're discussing, becomes, okay, let's meet a character, let's have some challenges, but at the end you send me out on a high.
And that's back to Joyce, epiphany and everydayness. I'm just watching a movie to chill out, and then you can have a major epiphany watching some stupid rom-com with your wife. So here's Godard said, the artist's doubt is more profound than the scientist's doubt. That was fun. I thought he was making a value judgment, like artists are cooler than scientists, but he was being challenged. Do you have the precision of a painter? So you guys led us to this, and I thank you. It's like this was all scripted beautifully in the cosmos. There's like George Lakoff says, if you want to change things, neuroscientists, you got to use the existing tools and then invent new tools. And Yvonne Rainer says, and you can even expose the existing tools. And I think that's what he did with the jump cut. It already was an existing tool, because guess who invented the jump cut? If you look in Wikipedia, George Méliès. I love that. John and I were talking about that. I says, wait a minute, let me see what Wikipedia says. And then it says Verto. Now, Méliès wasn't inventing the jump cut as much as he was inventing something that was call the jump cut eventually that helped him tell his story, his technique. But Vertov, it was a special effect. And Vertov, I think, would be the guy who invented the jump cut. But we're not debating that. It's that Godard put it in a Hollywood movie, in a popcorn movie, in an art cinema. When I say Hollywood movie, I mean the feature film. Because like back to what Mike taught me, Godard said it started with D.W. Griffith. He sort of invented the feature film format, you know, in as much as we go, oh my God, a guy who invented, he you know, Godard, I mean, D.W. Griffith put cross burning in the first feature film, and then the KKK went, hey, we can do that. So well, you're saying the Hollywood movie spawned the KKK? Yes. Hello. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, maybe he put it in there to be sensational, to be entertaining, and then the KKK come along and said, "Oh wow, this can be educational." and
I was just gonna say that.
Oh really? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No. It's funny.
But here it is. Now you take.
McLuhan was right.
Yeah. So McLuhan,
yeah, and then now we consider that film, you know, so racist and so outside the pale as to be not proper entertainment.
Well,
but you could just like, hey guys, let's watch. You know, let's put on Birth of the Nation. But in a film class, because it's educational, with appropriate disclaimers at the front of the film, a film professor may show it.
And Robbie, if you're a hipster great artist like DJ Spooky, you put a new soundtrack to it, you re-release it. So it's going to be regurgitated no matter what, because it's part of our culture. But then you go to McLuhan, learning from Vico and Joyce, the laws of media, the new science. And he doesn't invent, he just scams up the 4 questions we've asked all our life. And so let's apply the 4 Tetrad questions to the jump cut. It's something humans invented, the jump cut. In essence, it's how our lives happen. We're always jump cutting, but we did it with a film camera and an editing device. So we invented the jump cut. So John, you're up. The first question in the Tetrad is, and keep in mind, it's not the jump cut that we're doing. That's not the subject. It's the environment that the jump cut caused, and it's not the intention of the jump cut. It's the hidden psychic way it's shaped our behavior. If you go for the obvious, that's fine, but we're trying a little deeper. So John, what does a jump cut enhance or intensify?
Passage of time.
Good. Okay, Rob.
Enhance or intensify. Viewer attention. Nothing like a cut to, an abrupt
viewer attention. Really good. Patrick. I like that. Patrick.
I don't think I have a good answer. Just the general discontinuity of consciousness.
That's
good.
A damn good answer. That's a real good. Here's the thing. It's not, and keep in mind in doing tetrads, you don't want to think. It's like Brigitte Bardot. When I make love, I don't think. When you do tetrads, you don't think. You want to go with your impulse, your intuition, your percept. So it's not concept, it's percept. That was
like
fine.
Godard directing a film.
Exactly. Okay, Mike, what does a jump cut enhance or intensify?
Maybe adding to what Patrick said, it maybe reflects the way we think elliptically.
What's elliptic mean?
Or ellipsis, omitting, jumping.
Mm-hmm.
Omitting. Yeah, that's what Godard has in one of his quotes. He says that I'm trying to show you what's not there, not what's there.
And maybe the jump cut
wait, is that what elliptic is, Mike? Showing you what's not?
Something like that.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
So maybe the jump cut also really actually mirrors the way we remember conversations. Like, you don't remember the whole conversation. You remember little clips of what someone said, and particularly when they matter. And so if you were think about a long conversation you had, you're going to remember like 4 or 5 little jump cut clips of what someone said in an argument with you.
Yeah, this was heavy, Rob, because I wanted to go into this. Did humans invent the mirror? Because, we think, oh, it's mirroring society. Just like you said, this is mirroring how we remember. So I want to do a salon with all you guys someday on eye contact and the human gaze and the female gaze and the male gaze. For you locals, and if you can go see Nina Menken's new documentary called Brainwashed in a couple weeks. I'll be out of town, but you should go see it because it's about the female gaze and the male gaze. And here's a line I just, in studying for this Godard, I see my reflection in your eyes. So I always thought the first mirrors were water. That was humans just biomimicking nature. It could have been they saw themselves in the other person's eyes. So who knows? Okay, so John, you're up. Second question is, what does a jump cut render obsolete or displace? And keep in mind, if we were doing it on a car, the obvious answer would be the horse and buggy. But it doesn't mean that horse and buggies are obsolete completely or displaced. They still exist. The horses are still collapsing in New York last week. So what does a jump cut render obsolete? In all the tetrads, throw time out the window. What does a jump cut render obsolete or displace?
Boredom.
Very good. The Australian Aborigines have no word for boredom. Does that mean they never get bored? Hey, no, they probably get bored. They just don't call it that. Okay, Rob, what does a jump cut render obsolete?
Continuity, dream space.
Woo! There's a lot there. Okay, Patrick.
I'm really at a loss on this one. I'm just going to pass.
That's all right. See, here's the key. Thinking, like John's was paused, that thinking, that's the gap where we're all sitting there waiting. And then we're not trying to outwit each other. You go, oh, that's a good one. You go, oh, I was going to say that. Well, then think of something. But saying I'm a loss is the answer. What does a jump cut render obsolete? Being lost. No answer. So indeed, it's totally valid to say that. Okay, Mike, what does jump cut render obsolete or displace?
Oh, I don't know if it so much renders obsolete, but it might provide us with a little space to inject our own thoughts.
Yeah. Space to inject thoughts. Yeah. Good. And that's the gap is where the action is. Okay, John, you're up. What does, and this is the stupidest of the three, retrieve? So if we were doing a car, what does a car retrieve? The knight in shining armor. It sounds metaphorical, but it's basically everything retrieves the watering hole, the Zoom session, the water cooler talk. It retrieves humanity sharing tools. So, John, what does a jump cut bring back that we got rid of?
Dreams.
Yeah, it retrieves dreams. Good. Okay, Rob.
The rough cut, the sketch, the the early version.
Yeah, I love that. Why, John? Do you dream in jump cuts, or don't you dream in fluidity?
A lot of dreams they're like that. They shift
are like that.
instantly to something.
You're in a scene, and then you're in the next scene.
You're talking with your father, and then then also you're talking with your wife, and it just jumps. It needs.
We all dream Godard. It's not. It's not Spielberg, baby. It doesn't make sense. It just jumps around.
That seems a little brainwashing, Rob. I don't know if we all dream Godard, but I like it. Okay, Patrick, you're up. What does a jump cut retrieve? What does it bring back that we got rid of?
Well, to use a loaded contemporary term, wokeness.
Wokeness. Yeah. Invented by James Joyce. But tell us, Patrick, in your own words, what does wokeness mean in layperson's terms? What does that mean?
Well, I meant that ironically, actually, but
Right, but I mean, in general,
for me,
what do
it means, critical awareness. I
Yeah.
mean, what I kind of meant was that sometimes the jump cut, even in very old movies, because they show up in a lot of old 30s films, probably not intended to be avant-garde, but simply the effect of a, editorial process, where they may have lost some film or, something. But, waking you up means, waking you up from the sleep, because we do tend to fall asleep. And so if something even very slight interrupts that process, it sort of, if we notice it, brings you back. And I mean, I don't want to start talking about the contemporary use of that term, and the way it is created such a polarization. But I've always found it kind of ironic that people would be disturbed at the idea of being aware, because that's all wokeness means, is being aware.
I'm disturbed at being aware. That is good. But it is also goes back to McLuhan's great essay on narcissism as narcosis, in that everything we invent, is like the narcissism fable where the guy falls in love with himself. It's not that. McLuhan says, no, it's not that. We fall in love with our tools and we don't realize what they do to us. So he reinterpreted it, because he said narcissism is rooted in the word narcotic, and it's a drug, and we're numbed by these drugs. I mean, Godard was numbed by the jump cut. He says, this is my trope and I'm going to be the jump cut guy, and then, go ahead, John.
Right, but he never returned to the jump cut after Breathless, really.
That's it. Yeah.
Not that much.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
No,
that's good. Good point.
I haven't seen 130 Godard films.
I mean, there's little bits here and there that might be similar to, but I mean, so distinctive jump cuts like Breathless.
Right. Yeah, they are seminal to that film.
It's the ultimate Woody Allen line. I like his early funny films. It's like, I like his early jump cut films. Okay, Mike, what does a jump cut retrieve?
I was thinking something. John said something about boredom, but jump cuts definitely startle you when you see them. So it might be a way to help get back the attention of the viewer, because whenever you see a jump cut, it does startle you.
Yeah,
it might also be a way to hide your mistakes.
Cover up editing. Yeah.
It retrieves cover up. That's good. Or Thelonious Monk said there are no wrong notes. And we asked the great boogie woogie pianist Hannah Brooks, what do you think? And she goes, there's wrong notes. It's just how good you cover them up. That's what
in jazz, if you make a mistake, just repeat it.
Yeah, that's Miles' spot. Herbie Hancock gave a lecture at like Harvard 2 years ago and said that was my big lesson I learned from Miles. He hit a wrong note. He looked at Miles. Miles knew he hit the wrong note, and he knew with his eyes. Miles said, just cover it up. No one will know.
Yeah.
Because Herbie knew it was wrong. Miles knew it was wrong, but no one else knew it was wrong if you cover it up right, or just keep going. Go ahead, John. What were you going to say? And then Robbie.
That reminds me of I had a chance to talk to Bruce Conner, the filmmaker, experimental filmmaker, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like, if you're falling, jump. So, make it look like you meant to do that.
So, wait. Well, that's Bruce Conner's my ultimate hero. Same with Craig Baldwin's. That's his teacher. That's Buster Keaton. Turn a stumble into a dance.
Yeah.
That's all Finnegan's Wake. You fall and you get it back out. Rob, you were going to add something though.
Well, just only that maybe Godard again was willing to show us the stumbles, and so much of American filmmaking is just polishing. Every moment refined and smoothed and seamless and just perfect, which is great. Yeah. We love that too. But
yeah, but I do like it's the same with music. I hate stuff that's gotten so slick. It's like show me some ragged edges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
When Fontella Bass drops her lyric sheet at the end of the song Rescue Me, and she goes, instead of singing the words, that is my lifeblood. When she goes, I didn't know she dropped the lyric sheet and she was just making a sound, but that's what happened. So I didn't need to know that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go. Last step of the tetrad is what could it become when pressed to an extreme? So, John, what could a jump cut turn into or flip into when pressed to an extreme?
A still image.
Whoa! Rob.
2 answers. La Jetée. And second answer would be, I guess, like what are those? Epilepsy. Yeah. Epilepsy.
Oh, an epileptic fit.
Epileptic fit, where it just sort of, or phrase more accurately, an image which could induce an epileptic fit. Where it's sort of strobe lights. Really, is.
Well, Rob,
is the jump cut, right? The strobe light is to lighting what the jump cut is to editing. I mean.
And it's really what Tony Conrad
Flicker
did with the flicker. He flicked black and white
in the morning for me to be doing this.
But he got it. He got it from Jack Smith, who's the godhead to all those guys. Warhol, David Lynch. They're all Jack Smith wannabes. They've admitted it. John Waters, David Lynch, and then Warhol. They would be nothing. And what he would do would just feed in strips of film. No, he would just show the projector with no film in it. And then it was just a flickering light, So that I was going to say what you said, epileptic fit, because I showed strobe films before and a guy had an epileptic fit. And I felt responsible. And I says, you have to make an announcement whenever you show a flicker film before the film starts. That, and they forced Tony Conrad to put that on his, Tony to put that on his film in titles. This has flickering. If you have epilepsy, it might put you in. Okay, we got Patrick and Mike. Patrick. If you took a jump cut and pressed it to an extreme, what might it flip into?
Another form of continuity.
Mm.
Like in a lot of rock videos, which get kind of tedious because they overuse it to such an extent that it becomes predictable continuity.
Good one.
Yeah, and that's heavy because I asked Michael Apted 40 years ago, if why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished then to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So
he did, I'm sure. Yeah. But he did something much more original with that technique than a lot of the videos were really.
Then the rock music, rock video makers. Okay, Mike, what could a jump cut flip into when pressed to an extreme?
Well, if it's done artfully, it could help create new types of rhythm in storytelling.
Yeah,
and I just wanted to say, who does nice jump cuts is Robert Frank. In his film, Me and My Brother. If you want to study beautiful, I can't say what the feeling they're producing in me, but he does beautiful things in his jump cuts. But a new sense of rhythm.
Yeah, it's good. So we can go into, we got about 20 more minutes, and I really welcome any questions that remain unresolved for you in regards to film shape and behavior and Godard. Go ahead, Rob.
Slightly off topic, but I have as a guest in the house this weekend the children of Gerald Denemo, the director of Deep Throat.
Yeah.
And they have a 4K print of it, and they're going around and showing it in the West Coast. Then they're going to go to the East Coast, and I think they're going to Italy. They've got some festivals in Italy, and it's interesting talking to them. They're the children. They were actually on the set in the filming. And there's a lot of controversy around the film. We won't get into that. But they said the response on the West Coast, they actually had protesters in Vancouver because, of the controversy around the film and so forth. And, of course, the times that we live in, post-Me Too and so on and so forth, all the various sexual scandals in the press. And it was interesting. It's on the West Coast, as I guess, I hadn't thought of it, but it makes sense. They've encountered I guess you would say a feminist backlash or a cultural backlash where they've screened it. And I was trying to help them get a showing in LA, and, it wasn't so easy. I shared this with Jerry and so forth, but I just thought that was, really interesting. And the other thing that was intriguing that I wanted to bring up, which was unintended consequences. The film, obviously it's very misogynist, but it did have the effect of introducing the concept of the clitoris to the American male in the early 70s, like, hey, what are they talking about here? What's this clitoris? Maybe I want to check that out with the dames. A weird unintended consequences, argue the benefits of which, but just thought I'd throw that in there as a bizarre sort of film story.
It is very interesting, Robbie, because it is essentially, when I ask a big hotshot filmmaker, what's the function of cinema? All these people, and they always go storytelling. And, back to Peter Greenaway, said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left
to the storytellers. Yeah.
So, of course, we know that, and Greenaway told me in a lecture many years ago, people in LA, that Marty Scorsese's not doing anything different than D.W. Griffith. He's filming plays. Now, we know there's some difference, but the history of cinema, 130 years, is not much more than filming plays. But we want to think there's a lot more to it, and that's good. So why don't we talk about storytelling in regards to Godard? Because, some of you have seen his last films, and they're just like collages of what you see on MTV or on YouTube now. It's just like they're almost like turned into these tutorials. You can watch these tutorials on Godard now on YouTube, and they're like they are Godard films. they're like, an amazing hybrid. And so he quoted Bazin, there's a voice in Contempt that he says, cinema substitutes for our gaze a world that corresponds to our desires. So do films create false expectations? That's one question. And then Contempt is a story of this world. So, do films, I don't know what the question is there. We can jump off. We'll start with you, John. Do film create false expectations?
Why are you throwing me under the bus?
Right. No, John, because you're the guy, Mike and I were making a film, and he goes, like your friend John says, what's the theme? Well, no, I'm sort of struggling if any of you could come up with it. But basically it's, why did Godard quote this? Bazin, the cinema substitutes our gaze for our gaze, a world that corresponds to our desires.
Well, it's just like Rob was saying earlier, right? It's cinema is your own personal hero's journey, and you can play it out, and each different film plays into how yours works in your head. So, he kind of answered that already, it seems.
but is that creating false expectations? Like,
Sure.
you know, did the 20s to 40s appeal to the working class in America because they worked their ass off all day? Then they could go watch Fred Astaire live the high life and go, wow. And then what was that called? It's an anesthesia. It's sort of like, yeah, we can just brainwash
salve.
yeah.
A
Yeah.
salve on your sore
Yeah.
life.
I kind of feel like Buñuel on this subject, where he hated musicals. And he said, you know, what is in these poor people in these horrible conditions, and they sing and dance about how great life is. And he says, well, what's the goal in ever trying to get out of those situations, because it's false, you know. And I've always hated musicals for that exact reason. And Godard did one that was kind of played on that.
And this is kind of a beautiful thing. You know, all these criticisms, the criticisms that Patrick levied at Godard in the beginning, they're all valid.
Yeah.
You know, they are all valid. That everyone has these different reactions. Some people love musicals. That's what they love most about cinema. I mostly dislike them, except when they're very good. But you know, you take what you will away from a hero's journey. One hero's journey turns me off, and I'm just like, oh, I'm not interested in that. The individual interpretation is key. You know, even Tarantino says, if 1,000 people saw my movie, I think he says, I hope they saw 1,000 different movies.
Wow.
Because or maybe it's 100, but it's just the idea that it's individual experience, right?
Yeah. Well, that's my friend saw Blue Velvet when it came out and said, well, I guess it's a good movie. I just don't want to spend 2 hours of my life with those people. That was an amazing thought. And then I dumpstered over a copy last week, and Susie and I watched half of it. And it was like so much reflecting to me what Godard said. Hollywood.
I wonder if
wait, let me just say the line, Rob. Hollywood movies are just documentaries of actors acting. And that Blue Velvet to me reeked of that. It just reeked. I could tell they were acting. Sometimes it felt natural, but it was just like, okay, Laura Dern, now say this line. Okay, now walk like a chicken. Okay, I got that shot. And, you know, I mean, put it all together. You can be, you know,
interesting.
Entertained for 2 hours. But go ahead. What were you going to say, Rob?
Well, you just ruined my love of cinema with that statement. You made me it is true about
a similar reaction.
And there are other films like that where you can tell it's like, okay, let's give Dennis a real scene here and let him chew up some scenery. Well, I had a thought that brought it together, but
well, we'll come back to you. You get it.
Great.
Okay, Patrick and then Mike. Do films create false expectations, or anything on that Bazan statement he put in contempt?
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm going to address this issue of storytelling, because I think this is always, to my mind, a kind of a cheap shot, because storytelling is implicit in almost everything anyway. No matter what you do, you can't escape it.
Yeah.
The real problem to me is not, does cinema tell stories? The problem is that cinema doesn't just tell stories.
Yeah.
You know, is that the visual image has a way of overtaking the movement of the narrative, you know, and this is what makes film very different from novels, you know, except when you have a novel that uses language in such a way that the language disrupts the narrative process, the way Joyce does in his later work, or the way some of the Nouveau Roman writers would do. And so, I mean, you know, it's like, if I can use the example of Scorsese, you know, obviously Scorsese tells stories, but he disrupts continually with the way in which he edited it. And I like the way someone said, you know, that the editing is a way of creating a kind of beat or rhythm in films. And what really happened with Scorsese's films after, you know, MTV came along was that he began to focus more on rhythm. You know, it's like the way the pacing of it had a kind of a musical subtext. And if I can use another example too, someone mentioned Robert Bresson, because Bresson is I guess not usually thought of as an experimental filmmaker. And his films are definitely stories, but his films are visually intense, I mean, like, and forgive me for saying this, but unlike my response to a lot of Godard films, I am never bored, not even for a second when I watch a Bresson film. I'm completely captured by his eye, and that eye, like, even though the story's transpiring, you're shocked continually by the framing of the particular shot, and that to me is a very powerful weapon that digs deep into our unconsciousness and consciousness at the same time. So which to my mind is what makes film such a powerful. I mean, I guess, like, I make movies too, but my movies are just, I used to take a lot of photographs with a digital camera, and I didn't know what to do with them. I wasn't going to print them all, so I started making movies with them. And it was really simple and stupid, and then as I got along, it got a little more complicated and everything. And if not telling stories was really that experimental, then I would be one of the great filmmakers of all times, because my films have no storyline whatsoever. But they're not. I mean, I know what they are. They're just my way of putting something together so that I can look at it again with music and enjoy it without actually having to open a book and just stare at photographs. I mean, storytelling is not bad. It's just how they interact, the visual, with the storytelling. So,
Good, Patrick. Go ahead, John.
Hey, I was just going to say on that, I think half of that, like the Greenaway quote on storytelling, half of it is him, it's coming up with a clever thing that can be quoted for the next 40 years. But half of it is true. And I don't think, because all his films have a story. It's just that he's not saying, I think there's some truth in it, as well as the bravado of the statement, like that he's saying it doesn't have to be that same filmed play like W. Griffith to now. You could tell a story, but bring in other things, do it a different way, do other things. It's just, I think that's kind of, but he had to say it in a way that, we'll quote him forever. Right.
Yeah, and it is a good statement. And McLuhan said half the truth is still a lot of a truth. But Andrew Noren, and when I told Herzog that quote at the Academy once and asked him a question, all he could do was rip into Peter Greenaway and say his films aren't good. And it was like he didn't tackle the question. Was no. Andrew Noren said it. He said, what Patrick said, if you put one frame after another frame, that is storytelling. It doesn't matter if it's squiggly line. It's still a story. Go ahead, Rob. What were you going to say?
Well, coming off of what John said, that's bringing back this concept of education and entertainment. I want to say something poignant, but I'm going to put it in a pithy, even rhyming fashion, so it's entertaining, and therefore it's more likely to last in the minds of my, of my listeners, my viewers, right? That mix of education and entertainment.
And that's what I learned from this great artist Wayne Krantz today talking about art. He says, is the artist obliged to be a little accessible? Is he obliged? And there's some verbs in there that could be changed, but can I just throw shit on the wall and I don't care? Well,
plenty of people do.
Pollock did, and look what he did. But we know when you study Pollock, he came from something deeper, but it doesn't mean that somebody who does throw shit on the wall. Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Well, going back, this kind of comes up to, we've touched on this. It was Godard's also his timing and the fact that he maybe wasn't the first to do the jump cut and all that, but it was, Pollock showed up on the scene and was doing something that was like, oh my gosh, I mean, how can you get away with that? And maybe even Godard's film, Breathless, and a few others are a little bit like that. How can you get away with that? I remember my students saying, why are you showing this? This film isn't even finished, Some of them would get apoplectic.
Oh, good. Then you knew you were succeeding as a teacher.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
That reminds me of, so I dragged a bunch of family to see Weekend a few years ago playing in LA. And I had an uncle who's totally hip and, you know, with everything and loves films and stuff. But he said the way he described Weekend was, he goes, the guy put everything in a movie that you're not supposed to do in a movie.
That's
How
why
dare
it
he?
succeeded.
That was his,
That's-
and he was like, that's what he thought. Honestly, that Godard was doing this stuff on purpose. You never do a 10-minute shot of a this, and you never show that. You don't do this way. You don't long this cut that long. You don't have the guy talk to the camera. You know, and it was like, that's a great way of putting it.
And
But that's
how
why-
many revolutionary art movements have been thought of as garish and tawdry by an older generation? When you come along and you mix a little bit of entertainment, you mix a more tawdry brand of entertainment into your education, into your film, and the generation before says, oh, you can't do that. That's
Yeah.
And
you
that's
can't have distortion in your guitar. I mean,
yeah, but that's why I named this session Jean-Luc Godard. What's next? It's like, we're going to be lucky if someone comes around and does anything as important as Godard. And it's not like Patrick's like, I know this guy's valuable, but I don't necessarily have to like his films. I know he did some things to fuck shit up so that we can progress and we can, like Zappa said it best. He said, without deviation, progress is impossible.
and the next Godard will emerge, I think, in the YouTube space where you have somewhat like this, where you have a person talking to camera and then also showing clips, you know, classic, basic YouTube format, a lecture, but somebody messing with that. I've already seen some people getting experimental with that. As I mentioned before, jump cuts are fully part of their language. And I see that medium as a bit of the young, I mean, it's the new medium of, it's kind of doing what we're doing, but with a single person driving a narrative, visuals cutting back and forth. I think someone will play in that area and dismantle that. Someone young will dismantle that sort of milieu that has now become standard.
Yeah, and we can only hope, back to Patrick's word. But John, before you go, let's get Mike in. The question was about Bazan's quote on storytelling and do films create false expectations? Did you have any you want to weigh in, Mike?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up this documentary called Once Upon a Time There Was Contempt. It's a French-made documentary about the making of Contempt, and it's mostly an interview with Godard. So it's an hour-long interview with Godard, pretty much. And he says something really revealing. He said that during the 60s, you know, when he made his best films, he always ran up against a problem, which was around the 50-minute mark, he would run out of story. So he needed to come up with some way to fill in time in order to make a feature-length film. And that's pretty revealing. And he said it weakened his films. But I think, you know, part of the reason why he could be boring sometimes is that he's trying to fill in time with varying degrees of success. Sometimes he's not very successful, maybe,
because he was brainwashed to believe the trope was 90 minutes. That's why Craig Baldwin succeeded in his best film at Tribulation 99. It's 45 minutes. He didn't go, and then all the rest of his features, they got to be at 90 minutes. Nope. He said 45, I did it.
Right.
That's it. So yeah,
You
that
know,
was.
You know, if he didn't put those jump cuts in, he would have got back a lot of time.
Say it again, John.
He didn't put those jump cuts in, he would have got back a lot of time.
Right, exactly.
You just, you know, we're
he
going to call up. Wait, we're going to call up Godard from the grave and said, dude, we figured out in this Zoom, we could have helped you. Okay, Patrick, and then back to Mike. Go ahead.
Just one quick reminder, though, that part of what makes Godard different is precisely that he was, in a way, mainstream.
Yeah.
I mean, his films were shown in the art theaters when there used to be art theaters.
Yeah.
You know, people who, I mean, I'm not that knowledgeable of experimental cinema now, today.
Yeah.
Okay. And, you know, I have no apologies. It's just a fact. But who could not have known, who was in the least bit interested in movies, about Godard in the 1960s or even 70s. And when I was in Paris in 1982, and that's where I saw Vivre sa vie and a whole slew of Godard films that I hadn't seen in the United States, but I was on a Fulbright or something. And I mean, it's just, we forget. Just one quick anecdote. Recently, Ishmael Reed, the African-American author, trashed Hamilton and the author of Hamilton. And I found it kind of sickening because I mean, like, Ishmael Reed probably doesn't make that much money, but I'm sure he lives pretty well. And, you know, Lin-Manuel Miranda did something I think was pretty remarkable in that musical. By the way, I do like some musicals a lot. And even though I'm a leftist, I don't get into this routine of trying to draw this line where you get the commercial sellout and then the true avant-garde figure over here. To me, it's, you know, Godard had to find ways of funding his movies. It was definitely easier than it would be for Quentin Tarantino or James Cameron, but it was still a process within a capitalist system that he had to negotiate with. And I do appreciate the critical views he projected onto that system at different times, but often with a lot of wit and a lot of irony. You know, that's the part of Godard I actually really do like. Tout va bien, La Chinoise, and, you know, and Weekend, you know, and some others. But
really well put, Patrick. You really enlightened us because we're a bunch of smartasses and think avant-garde's better, blah, blah, blah. But that's Paul Schrader, who is sort of mainstream, who's a Bresson freak, said the role of the artist is to attempt to sell out but fail. So,
I like that.
Godard had a 50-minute film. He goes, I've got to make it 90. I'll sell out and add this other bullshit. And then he failed. And then he changed his mind. Hold it. Let Rob and then John. Go ahead.
Well, I love Mike's comment. I think it's right on. And I think that that's true of a lot of films. We've all seen films that had an interesting premise and maybe even an interesting first act, maybe even through to the second act, but they didn't know how to close it, or there was no real purpose. There was no resolution that was satisfying or whatever. And interestingly enough, the new television medium, most television shows are now 50 to 55, whatever kind of minutes, right? I mean, that episodes are. And I often find those really, really work. You know, that shorter format. I think it's something about the human attention span, and people will binge multiple episodes. They'll go, okay, I'll have 3 hits of 50 minutes with a 5-minute break in between. It really calls into question this 90 minutes and above format. I mean, I think it probably also mirrors theater, where people are going to feel a little disappointed if they don't get an hour and a half to 2 hours of entertainment. Incidentally, slightly tangential, some of the sports leagues are looking at this. The NBA would love to get their games down from 2.5 hours to 2. Baseball is trying to get their games under 3 hours because the attention span of the audience is getting shorter. Why do we have to be adherent to, you know, a baseball game could go on for 4 hours? I don't need 4 hours of entertainment. And by the way, we could use some jump cuts in here to speed up the action.
I'm all for a 10-minute basketball game.
Yeah. I mean, and on YouTube, what they'll do, and a lot of the people who comment on basketball, I'm a big NBA fan, they'll condense a game, which will be all the made baskets, down into 30 minutes, or you can even get a 10-minute version. So if you don't have time to watch all the games, you can watch a 10-minute version. Hey, that's where it's going. And this jumped into my head earlier. Is Godard, you know, at the front end of helping to rejigger the medium and helping some of these old standards, these old lengths, and these old pacing that we had to film? It's gotten faster. Well, guess what? Your audience has gotten more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Film opens. Here's a guy. Here, you know, here's the situation. Oh, that person's going to end up being the villain of the story. Oh, he's going to fall in love with her. We get it in 10 minutes, man. We've all seen millions of movies. And so speeding it up, jump cutting it, moving forward, or as Mike sort of seemed to suggest, or condensing it to 50 minutes. Is that such a bad thing? Maybe it's the medium catching up to the acumen of the audience.
Yeah, that's why the Godard was called the Beckett of cinema. Beckett had a play that's 30 seconds. It's a pile of garbage on a stage. A baby cries and then gasps for air, and that's it. And I always thought the people in the audience went, "Wow, that went by fast. Let's go have dinner now and talk about the play." Like 30 seconds, we're in and out. Okay, John, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, I was going to say something else, but on what Rob was saying, another thing that Greenaway just said last month when I saw him, somebody at an audience asked him, like, "Is it true that you don't like Tarkovsky?" And he said, "No." He goes, "They're so fucking boring." He said it that way. Sometimes it just goes on for 15 minutes and not a fucking thing happens. He goes, and I talked to him about this years ago. Like, they actually talked about, and Greenaway is known for some very long takes too. Yeah. But it was just funny that, amongst even within the ranks. But what I was going to say earlier was just the idea of the avant-garde. Is I remember in film school that avant-garde means ahead. It's the front troops, and they're always the ones that do something that then becomes absorbed into the mainstream. So like a jump cut or things like that. And it reminded me of if you get like an editing system like Final Cut, you can actually go on and there's filters and settings that can add dust and splices and scratches to your film. What we've been trying to avoid for my own scratches in there. Thank you. But it's just funny that even things like that come back as a thing later to use.
Yeah, John, that's the word I was going to name this salon avant-garde. Avant-garde. I ripped it off from some headline. But there is Mike, did you finish your points on storytelling and the Bazin and the life? Yeah, go ahead if you want.
I did. I only wanted to provide the examples that he provides of his creating filler. The scene in Weekend where he has a guy reading, I think he opens up a book of La Tremone and he's just wandering a field and just reading from it. That's an example. And some people might find that an incredibly beautiful scene, and some people might find it incredibly boring. So, and then the other scene is in Contempt, the famous apartment scene where they have their big fight. If you look at the content of that scene, you could probably accomplish that scene in 10 minutes or so, but he stretches it out to 35 minutes, and he's aware that it weakened his films. Anyway, that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, and then Mike, it was good because I actually was going to bring that up. The guy is reading something in one of Godard's early films, the protagonist, and he says, "Mao's ideas can help me. You need sincerity and violence," and so it's funny. It reminded me of McLuhan saying, "Shut up," he explained, but this thing about violence is human search for identity. And I thought in our time together today, sorry about that. Hi, in our time today, we did come up with some sort of sussing out of what is Godard's identity to us. If the user is the content, it's all, each one of us can come up with some other interpretation and sharing these different interpretations. So I sort of have a little closing, but we can just go round robin and any final thoughts or, the big question is what question remains unresolved for you? If indeed Godard was here with us, what would you ask him? Or what's a question that remains unresolved for you? Patrick, we'll start with you.
Well, okay, in lieu of the conversation, then I'll just say that the thing that I tend to question and can't really resolve in my own head is I really don't buy high and low, and I don't even buy avant-garde. And frankly, I'm even skeptical about experimental.
Yeah.
cinema. And I don't mean that just to me, there are people who make movies.
Yeah.
And I envy them because I wish I was making movies. In
Yeah.
fact, I have made movies, but they're not really movies. And because that has been my passion in life, is cinema. I mean, it's been the center of my life as long as I can remember. It's the thing I love the most, you know. And but I don't see innovation coming from the front or the back. I just see it coming from multiple directions. And I think all these categories we construct are largely social constructions that serve various purposes that most of us don't agree with.
Really good point, Patrick. I've gone to Ann Arbor for 30 years. It's 60 years. The medium's 130 years. It's inclusivity and exclusivity. What we want is a festival that shows Betty Boop, Hitchcock, and Bruce Conner, and then you get the big picture. So if you marginalize it, then you're doing more harm in the long run, possibly. So who knows? It was a really good point. Okay, John, you're up.
Yeah, no, on what Patrick said, I agree. I call myself an experimental filmmaker, but only because I don't just do a narrative, or I don't just do that. And it is sort of cutting into groups, which you don't really need. But I did come up with my own quick reply that when you interviewed me at Ann Arbor a million years ago, and you said, do you think it's important to tell a story? And I said, it is, but it's also important to story up the telling. No, it never caught on. I mean, that's a good quip, isn't it?
That's really good.
But
that's
what I'm saying.
Put it in a real concise aphorism, and I'll put on one of my flyers. Definitely.
Good.
Yeah, we need an aphorism.
Yeah, it's it's like when I released one of my early films on the tape, I was going to put a quote on the back that another uncle who came to the screening said. He got up at the end of the film and said, "Yeah, that's not bad. I've seen a lot worse shit than that on TV."
So that was a guy in Ann Arbor. He says, "I didn't fly 3,000 miles to see shit that I can watch on MTV." So, John, what would you ask? What's an unresolved question of Godard or about Godard, or what would you ask him if he was here right now? Tibetan Book of the Dead say the spirit leaves in 3 days, but some say he's still around, wavering around. What would you ask him?
I would ask him if he stole my idea. Years ago, I was in Spain making a film, shooting a film. And I tried to contact a bunch of people. Greenaway, Godard, and John Jost were all around the area or somewhere near. And I wanted to interview them for this film I was making. The film was a play on Dante's Divine Comedy. And the interviews with these filmmakers were going to be the Paradiso section. And I wrote that in my email to Godard or Godard's secretary or whoever I don't think he ever responded. But I said that it's about Dante, blah, blah, blah. His next film out was Dante's Divine Comedy, had references and was somewhat based on Divine Comedy. And I'm like, and a friend of mine, a filmmaker, she wrote me and said, "Godard the thief?" ?
Yeah, that's a good story.
So he wouldn't give me an interview, but I think he took, he said, "Oh yeah, I haven't done anything with Dante yet. Maybe I'll do that." So
Steal from the best, John.
Steal from the best. Okay, Robbie, you're up. Any closing comments, questions?
Yeah, I would ask Godard how he got all those beautiful wives. That would be my question. And then secondly, I would say, I liked your question. What is the Godard identity to me? And, to put it in a teaching context, I'm a teacher. Like, he would be the student in the class who you would give a begrudging B to. He might have even done C work. He wouldn't even really do the assignments. He would sort of have a contrarian, disassembled response to your assignments. But they were so clever and so contrarian and almost pushing back on the premise of your assignment that you would, I can't give him an A because he didn't do the work, but I got to give him a B. That's the identity to me, a contrarian who is dissecting and dismantling and even commenting on the lesson and the challenge of being a filmmaker.
you're you conformists are all alike.
Or you contrarians are all like.
You contrarians are all alike. Okay, Mike, any the question, any comment, closing, or question you'd ask Godard? Or
I wouldn't ask a question. I would just tell him, I hope we don't disappoint you.
no, it's good. It's
He'd say
really
too late.
Too late for that.
no, you anticipated the closing. So Brody in New York Times said Godard made his movies into living works of movie criticism, and who made his films fictions overlap with his theoretical inclinations and viewing passions alike. It was really well put, how much great words have been written about him. And Jean-Luc Godard said, space is the time it takes to find the other. So it's like this effort to see what is normal and what is the other. But I really love the Brody at the end of his article was that cinema is nearly over. And Godard said, when I die, it will be the end. So, it could be meaning, is it the end of cinema when I die, or when I die, it will be the end of Godard? And Brody said, Godard was wrong and it's his own fault. So, he's not going to be able to cancel out himself from dying because he forgot to die and his influence will live on, or he's reincarnated through his presence in cinema history and, critical thinking. So anyways, gentlemen, it's really been fun. Anybody have a final shout out? Otherwise, I'm going to end the broadcast and say, I hope it never ends and we can continue this discussion forever and ever. Go ahead, John.
I've got one last thing because I was going to interject at the beginning when you talked about, was it Harry Smith's quote that cinema's made to put us to sleep?
Yeah.
Funny story. Here's a storytelling. Years ago, they were showing Harry Smith at LACMA at the LA County Museum, a retrospective. And we dragged then he was maybe 8 years old, our son to the screening of Heaven and Earth Magic or something. It's like a 50-minute film, silent, of animated paper cutouts that would move around and, various combinations. About halfway through, silent movie, giant LA County Museum theater, my son just goes, "This is long." There's a moment of silence, and then half the theater applauded, and then he laid down on the floor of the theater and went to sleep for the rest of it.
Brilliant. His work was done.
Yep. And Smith had said, so he can't fault him for that. So
yeah, and
I
it is,
that,
you look to the intuition of children. Go ahead, Rob. What were you going to say?
I love that Jerry set up how this session should proceed, and it mostly did, but then we also interrupted each other, and Jerry was as guilty of all the crimes he told us not to commit. Anyway. So a very Godard approach to the Zoom, and I think that's in keeping.
Thank you, Rob, and thank
our
you.
Own jump cut. So
yeah, our own jump cut. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, John. All right.
All right.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.